So can everybody see my presentation? I'm assuming they can. Very good.
Yes.
Just starting off, looking at, most of you probably think if you're of any size that you need a website and Facebook. And you might, but you probably don't have the resources to do both of them well. I'll say at this point, unless you've got a particularly visual product, your website and your Facebook are where you should be concentrating your resource, not other social channels, because they're where the people are. So if you're doing lots of work on other channels, it's not that you probably won't get the same level of return. So I would recommend, if you're looking at social, absolutely put the bulk of your effort into Facebook, unless your product's very visual. If it's very visual, it's probably worth having a little look at Instagram as well as Facebook. But apart from that, they're the two that I would think about. I would probably not think about any of the others at all, unless you're in a particular niche. The danger with both your website and your Facebook is they probably kind of evolved as you've gone along without you really thinking clearly about what you want to achieve with either of them. And because of that, they're maybe not doing the right job for you. So both of them, if you use them in the right way, they can add a lot of value for your organizations, as long as you play to their strengths and your strengths. And so the aim of this presentation is really to try and get you to understand a little bit more about what each of them is good for and not so good for, so that you can really think about what you should be doing. So in terms of Facebook's, obviously the strength of Facebook is free. It's quick and easy to set up, and it's really easy for you to add content. And if you have good content, you can get regular engagement from your followers, and without spending any money, it is possible to grow your user base, but it's very difficult. The other thing is, which obviously one of you mentioned concerns around, it's great for having conversations with your audience. So listening to what they've got to say, you can get great tips around things that you could improve, but you've also got the opportunity to smooth the water around concerns, as long as you handle that really sensitively. Obviously, I would never recommend getting into a slanging match with anyone in the public, and it's probably better if someone's really trolling you just to back away from that, rather than, and get them blocked, rather than getting engaged in the conversation. You can live stream. If you're a charity, you can set up donations from your Facebook page, and there's not a charge for the donations, although it did take a little while, which will come on in a minute. The other thing about Facebook is, if you have a Facebook account, you can use Facebook advertising, and that is a good way to grow both your customer base and promote offers and things to existing, similar customers to your existing customers. So if you're looking to grow, you probably do have to spend a little bit of money if you're using Facebook, rather than just using it organically, because you're going to get a much bigger reach much more quickly, and it can be very, very targeted. In terms of weaknesses, if you only have a Facebook page, you're probably viewed as less professional than an organization that has a website. That would particularly be the case if you're looking for things like grants and that kind of thing, where you're pitching to professional businesses, professional organizations. It does give you a bit more credibility to have a website. Facebook pages, you can't really index very well. So from the point of view of visitors, it's very much a live activity. So if they're looking for something in particular, it's actually quite difficult to find. You might have posted once about something, but unless they know that and search for it, it's difficult to find information. The comments are in the public domain, although you can hide them, but that tends to cause issues of its own. It's very easy to post just for posting's sake, thinking I need to post something without really thinking about what your objective is if you're going to post. The Facebook donate, if you do have it live, it does take a while for the payments to come through, a bit slower than some of the other platforms, but there is no fee. And then also you have very limited data on the visitors who are interacting with your page. So in terms of communicating with them other ways or growing information, if you're just using organic Facebook, it's difficult to use that information, and you can't use it to help you build your business or your charity. So in terms of Facebook, things that's really important to think about: while your page is important, your base page, and on the right you can see the one from St Oswald's Hospice, it's not going to drive engagement with your audience. What's going to drive engagement is having regular posts. And if you're posting, you really need to be posting probably 2 to 3 times a week as a minimum if you want to keep your audience engaged, and that content needs to be interesting. Now, the way that Facebook works, like all other social platforms, is it wants to keep you on its page once you've arrived there. And the way that it does that is by trying to give you things that it thinks you're going to be interested in. So if people aren't engaged with your posts, even the people who are your followers won't necessarily see them, because it's only going to show them to people who they think might be interested. So people who have interacted with previous posts. So, which is why I was saying it's important to do it regularly to make sure that they are engaged, but also it's really important that you think about the content. So I would recommend using different types of posts to give your content some structure, and also to keep your audience engaged. If you're always talking about the same thing, people are going to get switched off. They're not going to interact with it more than once or twice probably. So you need to keep churning the content and what you're talking about. In terms of the base page itself, really important that it's as complete as possible, that it's correct and that it's current, because it does have information like your contact information if people want to try and contact you other ways. On the page itself, I would absolutely recommend using the pin feature so that you can post your most important information at the top of the page, and it's always going to stay at the top when people go onto your page and look through. And Facebook advertising can be a effective way to reach new audiences, particularly if you're looking at targeting. You can look at things like previous visitors to your website and retarget them, that kind of thing, and your existing lists. So that's Facebook. In terms of websites, strengths, it projects a professional image. If you get the design right, your audience can find information quickly and easily. You can build in quick routes for donation. It's a really good tool for building your email database. And from my point of view, from a marketing perspective, your email database is your most powerful asset, much more powerful than your Facebook page, because these are people that are already engaged with you. And once you have them signed up, you can communicate with them for free, basically. So I would absolutely recommend your email database as being your first function, your first area to concentrate on, and then your Facebook if you're looking at generating new leads. There are free analytics tools like Google Analytics that you will put on the back of your website. If you set them up properly, they can tell you an awful lot of information about how people are interacting with your website. So you can see which pages people leave from really quickly, things like that. So that tells you which parts are working and which parts aren't. And if you use the right types of links and codes on your promotional material, you can actually track what that person does after they land on the website. So do they stay on the page that you want them to? Do they go somewhere else? So something like your email database will tell you whether someone clicked a link, but it doesn't actually tell you after that what they did when they got to the website. They might have bounced off immediately. They might have gone on to buy something, but you can't see that. In terms of weaknesses, it takes time and effort and skill to build a website. You need to really think at the beginning about what you want to do. You need to be proactive to drive visitors to your website. People are not going to find it by accident, as opposed to Facebook, whereas Facebook, you might pop up in their feed without them actively thinking, oh, I want to go and look for this today. Whereas your website, they've got to click a link, they've got to Google, they've got to do something to drive them there. It's not going to automatically appear in their feed. They're often not structured to meet what the audience or the charity's needs are. So in terms of when you're very starting at the outset, you're not thinking, right, who's going to visit, what they want to find. So I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. It's not always easy to add or change content. You might have to have a developer do that for you. So it's really important to get it right. And it's not a very dynamic thing. You're not going to be changing the content on your website every 2 to 3 days in the same way that you would add a post on Facebook. Time consuming and expensive to make any changes. And you can't have a direct dialogue with your customers. You can put surveys up, but you can't have dialogue unless you've got a chatbot or something like that. And even that is not really a live conversation. It's answering common questions rather than having a more open conversation that could go in any direction. When you're speaking to face to someone, you might think your conversation at the outset is going to go in one direction, but they might say something by chance that you'd suddenly pick up and think, oh, actually, no, maybe we'll talk about that instead. And they're not really structured to do that. And you are responsible for ensuring the legal requirements of your website are met. So things like your privacy policy, and if you're a retailer, your returns policy and things like that, you're responsible for ensuring that they comply with the law, whereas somewhere like Facebook is managing a lot of that for you and is screening a lot of your content and will block things that it thinks are inappropriate or against its own privacy policy and terms and conditions. So in terms of if you're designing a website from scratch, things to think about, you need to get the structure right in the very beginning because you don't want to change it. So you need to start by thinking about who you want to visit the website and what you want them to do when they get there. And the design of the website is just to make that as easy as possible for them to do what you want them to do. So the information that's the most important should be really easily visible early on, that you need to minimize the number of clicks that they need to make to do what you want them to do. And I'll come on to a little bit more of that in terms of examples on another slide. And if you've got a home page, a rotating banner is quite often a good idea, as long as you're able to change the image, because that's a really quick and easy way for you to update if you've got an event coming up, if you've got a special offer, any of that sort of stuff. So I would think about that, but also just you need to be a little bit careful about that from a technical point of view in terms of what it does to your website. So things not to do: don't overcomplicate it. If you can get away with a few pages, that's what you should have. Don't feel the need to add additional pages, and don't add a lot of information that's not going to be of interest to your visitors. Or at least if you're going to have that information, don't put it in a prominent place. Tuck it away on the back end somewhere that people who need it can find it. But if 90% of your visitors don't want to see something, then that shouldn't be front and center when you first visit the website. Avoid using jargon and acronyms that your visitors will not understand. So when you're very involved in something, you tend to know a lot of the technical terms, whereas someone who's just looking out on the street would call it something different. So in terms of when you're writing the copy that's on your website, always think about the way that someone who knows nothing about your activity would say it, and try and use those phrases, because they're the sorts of phrases that will be found on organic search on places like Google. Make sure that the text is large enough to be easy to read, on all formats, and again I'll come on to that in a little bit in a minute. And avoid using coloured backgrounds behind text, because it makes it more difficult to read, it makes your eyes tired, and there are some regulations around visibility, so that people who are don't have perfect sight don't struggle too much to read your website. So just be really careful. You might think it looks interesting and jazzy, but it's probably not making the experience for the user any easier. And because of that, the search engines are going to mark you down in their rankings. Use low resolution images. Very large images slow your website down. And that is one of the key things that's really important to Google, is how quickly does your website load. If it loads slowly, they will push you down the rankings, even if the other content is great, because they're all about the user, that they want to be seen to be giving the user the information they want in a really easy to use format. So if it's taking a while to load, their opinion is that's not easy for the user, and therefore it's not somewhere they particularly want to send you. And other than the legally required items, don't include content that isn't of interest to your users just because it's of interest to you or people who are not your target audience. It isn't really a lot of point in having a lot of traffic to your website if it's not traffic that's going to convert to what you want them to do. So in terms of website design, something to think about, which is really, really important, is most of your users are going to be on a mobile phone. They're not going to be on a desktop. So in terms of the design, you need to make sure that the design on the mobile tells everything that it should when they first click through. So these are two examples of homepages of a couple of local charities, both of which have good things and bad things. So I'll talk you through some of these from my point of view. So if I start with the Cocoa one, I think the logo is great, really prominent. I think it's great that they've got the line up there telling you what they do. Because if I land on this website by chance and I don't know what this organization does, if I can't work that out from the homepage, I'm not going to scroll down the page. I'm going to bounce straight off again. So they're good things about this website. Things that are not so good, you can see there's some text there that's completely illegible. It's difficult to know how to navigate from this page. And the banner itself is not a really great, strong selling point on that particular page because the text on it is quite small from a mobile point of view. So St Oswald's Hospice on the right, generally much better. You can see in the top right-hand corner, they've got the menu, they've got the search, which is great. There's a very prominent fundraising button and a donate button, which again, these are two things that are really important to people who visit that website. And their banner, you can see, is much clearer, it's much simpler. It's talking about their most urgent activity at the moment. And that's where I was talking about being current. What this website doesn't have on the homepage is it doesn't actually tell me what St Oswald's Hospice is, where it is, things like that. So I would personally like to see an equivalent line to what Coco's got on that first page. And that's more important to a casual visitor than the limited visiting possible, which is you can see on the St Oswald's Hospice page. So just a couple of things for you to think about, but certainly if you are thinking about your website, unless you're a business that is only trading business to business and it's business customers who are visiting you, you should always think about the mobile and what the mobile view looks like. If you're a business, then you are going to get more traffic that's business to business on a desktop. So then the desktop view is important as well. But in terms of Google and the way Google ranks based on the performance of your site on a mobile, not on its performance as a desktop, because from its point of view, that's where the majority of users are coming from, and the proportion of that is increasing. So in terms of content, make sure that your website is using phrases and descriptions that potential visitors are looking for. You won't get many visitors if your content on your website isn't interesting to them when they get there. So you need to think of ways to add interest. So we talked a little bit about not using color backgrounds, but things like using relevant images and video rather than just text are really important. Include content that encourages emotional connection. So things like case studies where someone you've worked with, maybe a previous customer or someone who's benefited from your charity, them talking about how it's had a positive impact on them is enormously powerful. And recommendations as well from people who've used your services before. So they can be text, they can be video, they can be images. It doesn't really matter, but and I would say for me, it's great to start thinking about, can I use some of them maybe in the banner, some of that sort of information, so that from the very first instance that someone's landing on your website, they are starting to think positively and thinking of you in a personal context rather than as an organization. And don't forget to take advantage of what you can find out from things like Google Analytics in terms of what people are doing. It might be that you're driving a lot of traffic to your website, but they're leaving immediately. Well, if that's the case, it's telling you something about that page and telling you that the page that they're landing on is not what they were expecting to see. So